This is WSOU's debate on what is the best metal genre. I am DJ Psychosis, representing progressive metal, which is a fusion of heavy metal and progressive rock.
I'm DJ Valentino, and I'll be representing post-hardcore. And essentially, post-hardcore is like hardcore music, but with slight metal influences. The best way to kind of describe it is it's like metal where singing and screaming are roughly kind of the same level. One doesn't trump the other. Equal amounts of singing and screaming, also with more melodic guitar work rather than more heavy guitar work.
I'm the General, and I'll be representing power metal, which is a subgenre of heavy metal that kind of combines traditional heavy metal with really clean vocals and generally more fast metal. It's in the genre of speed metal.
I'm DJ Ronnie Cass. I'll be representing thrash metal, which is a more extreme genre of heavy metal. It's characterized by basically a fast tempo, some nasty guitar riffs, and some really far out shredding.
So I'm gonna start getting into it right away. Progressive metal is the best genre because it is absolutely experimental. It's cerebral. It has loud aggression with an amplified guitar-driven sound, and there's a lot of like very technical proficiency that these artists have to go through to make things sound like all these complex rhythms, but they have to work together to create an unorthodox harmony. And one of the best examples of why progressive metal is absolutely amazing is the band Tool, who is a progressive metal band. They claimed #1 on Billboard 100 with their first release in more than 13 years. They beat Taylor Swift with her song Lover, and that was up there for a while. They sold 270,000 copies, and that had mostly pure album sales. And they've had several Grammy Awards, and that #1 spot in Billboard 200, that was their third album to do so. Because progressive metal is so experimental, you can work with a lot of different things to create this metal sound that's like blown out of proportion to other people.
Now, I do agree with that, and I do agree that it does take a lot of technical ability to make that progressive metal. But I will say with Tool in particular, when you take such long gaps between albums, that will boost the album sales and put them more on top to the Billboard Hot 100. So they are a great example of how successful the genre can be, but only because, again, they took their newest release, they took 13 years between albums. It was such a long time. So these fans that are really into it, that huge gap is going to increase the hype, which is, again, I think a part of the reason for that. I think post-hardcore, though, as a whole, has much more mainstream appeal. And I think that along with, again, genres like that pop rock, the dad metal, and the scene metal, it's like a gateway band that gets people into heavier bands. It has this strong and mainstream approach to it. And I think, again, because it's like singing mixed with the screaming, mixed with the heavy guitar work that's more melodic, it's easier to digest. And a lot of these bands really go on to do a lot of incredible things and really dominate the scene of rock.
Wow. All right. Well, speaking of dad rock, I feel like power metal is, often trashed on, but honestly, there's no reason to be, because #1, the two main influences in power metal are really Dio and Iron Maiden, which are two of arguably the best traditional heavy metal bands to ever, grace the face of the earth. Not only that, but power metal, every single band sounds different. They have their own unique sound, and they have kind of their own unique image as well, Bands like Sabaton, who tend to go strictly towards, albums that talk about war, and then you've got all these other different genres. You've got like Viking sounds too. With power metal, every album tells a story, which I think is really interesting that you don't always get on other types of metal genres, but every album tells a distinct story, and it's very evident, which I really appreciate. Plus, the clean vocals are a bonus for me. I like hearing and understanding the lyrics right away.
I get that, but one of the biggest gripes that I personally have with power metal is the lyrical content is always kind of subpar in my opinion. And the instrumentation is great too. Like the instrumentation, you're right, they sound differently sonically speaking. But in terms of lyrics, I feel like that's always one of the more weaker forms of metal, in my personal opinion. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that agree with me on that side.
Well, I think I'm going to bust my foot through the door here and say that thrash metal is probably the biggest influencer in all of metal. I mean, you've got Slayer, Metallica, Megadeth, Motorhead. For God's sakes, Metallica has the word metal in their name. You don't get more metal than that. But anyway.
I think just having the word metal in your name doesn't really make it metal. Like, yes.
Hardcore.
Absolutely. Those bands you named were amazing, and they really paved the path. But they're kind of history now. I mean, we got new bands coming out.
Are they really history?
Yeah, because
history.
And I will say this: I agree with Sadet in this regard that a lot of those like big bands like Megadeth and Metallica, they don't tour that much anymore. They'll do one-off shows, but they're not constantly always touring. Like again, like power metal bands, post-hardcore bands. Sometimes progressive metal bands, they do tour nonstop around the clock.
But something else you got to understand is that all this music is generational. Don't think that your favorite post-hardcore bands are going to be doing this, 50 years from now. Metallica probably thought they were going to be doing this 50 years from now, but look at them now. It's all generational. You're going to have your ups, you're going to have your downs. Metallica's up was probably the high, they were probably as high as any band could ever possibly get. Post-hardcore guys, I mean, don't get me wrong, their music is tremendous, but you can't go out and think that they're going to be touring as much as they are. That's what happens with old age. It just so happens that those guys might have rocked too hard for it.
To rebuttal that, Silverstein went on their 20th anniversary tour. They've been around for 20 years, and they're still going all across America. They're still doing all these tours. So I do agree that like old age might make you not tour as much, but especially bands like Silverstein, bands like Sleeping with Sirens and all that, they tour all the time. They never stop, and they've been around for these 10, 15 years. So it's not like they've earned their rank. Bands like Silverstein could easily not tour for a year and then do one or two tours, but they choose not to.
Well, when it comes down to touring, we have Dream Theater, and Dream Theater constantly tours as well, and they've been around since 1985, and they've always been releasing albums and putting out new types of work for the fans to enjoy. And when it comes to what Val said earlier about how progressive metal, we take like long breaks between each album, that's because we're so experimental. Everything that they do is just trying to figure out another way to add a random instrument that you've never heard of in this genre, and then you're hearing it and it's just what happened.
Now, I agree that that's a huge factor in the progressive metal, and when done right, it's flawless and absolutely breathtaking, but it can be done wrong so easily. Like I know, like especially with some Tool songs, there's like a 3-minute bongo solo that doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't really build momentum to the song. It's just kind of there to be there. And I think that progressive metal, sometimes they try so hard to be out of the box that they make it so that it doesn't really have as much meaning and substance. The best progressive metal bands are the ones that experiment with new stuff, but still have the momentum of the song go forward. A lot of times, I think a lot of progressive metal bands get caught up in this, trying extra hard to be artsy, trying extra hard to be, unique. Another thing that I would like to bring up about post-hardcore, kind of one of the reasons that I believe that it's so strong, is it's been able to keep up with society as society grows. So these post-hardcore bands, back in the days of like Thursday and Glassjaw, they were huge on MySpace. They had like MySpace everywhere. And then you kind of evolved to like Pierce the Veil and Sleeping with Sirens. And those bands got really big into Tumblr. And now you're seeing a resurgence of these bands on TikTok, this new social media platform, where people are doing their like scene post-hardcore phase, where they're kind of referencing all these post-hardcore bands. So post-hardcore has continuously kept up with the metal genre and the mainstream genre as well through the use of social media and technology.
Well, you brought up a really good point there. It's because they're going through their little emo phase and scene phase, and then they give it up. You listen to it again because, I'm reminiscing about that time I covered my one eye with my hair. But it's a use. It's a tool at that point.
Else I'd like to add about touring, and I keep bringing up Metallica a lot, but Metallica's been around since '82, and they had shows planned for this upcoming year before the pandemic hit, and they had to, shut them down. Not to mention, Metallica was so diverse when they did that. I mean, their S&M album. Name a band that put on a show with a symphony orchestra in the background. Can you do that? I don't think either of you guys can do that right now. Not to mention that they add to the diversity of that, as in General's getting ready to flame me right now, but she's just going to have to wait for me to finish my talking point a little bit. But if we're talking about touring and all that, they still bring the energy despite their old age, and that's all that matters. Not to mention, I'm sorry, but thrash metal bands, I don't think they'd ever put their fans through 13 years of waiting. Just saying.
Ooh,
Okay, well, first of all, no, Metallica's not the only heavy metal genre that's ever done a performance with a live orchestra. Nightwish, if you know who that is, they're on the power metal side, but they have like an opera singer as their lead singer. They've done that. I'm sure several other bands have as well. So, just because you have a live orchestra doesn't mean you're the best. I'm sorry. But talking about live shows, you want like a cool, engaging live show, you go to a power metal show. Like, I'm sorry. That's the way it is. Because they have so much like set design, and there's a theme, and I'll keep bringing it back. There's a theme to these shows, and I think that really makes people engage with the music. And then kind of to go off the Metallica tour, yeah, okay, Metallica is great if you see them live, obviously. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but you're seeing them in a stadium, and I feel like it's not the same if you go to, like, a smaller show and see them, because, you're in the pit then. You're not necessarily in the pit if you're seeing Metallica.
I have to agree in terms of performance and, like, stage set design-wise, power metal has some of the strongest live shows ever. But in terms of crowd work, I think that the post-hardcore scene is such a community that the crowds are more engaging and more fun to be in. I'd like to go back to something that DJ Psychosis said about post-hardcore and how it's kind of like a quote-unquote scene. A lot of people think that it's like your scene and you grow out of it, but look at Thursday. Thursday had their like teenage fan base when they were in the early 2000s. Then they continued and their fan base grew and evolved with them. And then they gathered new fans through that process to the point where they actually opened for My Chemical Romance, the emo band, at the Shrine. And that sold out within 3 minutes and had a 6,300 capacity venue. And again, that's not just these like scene people that grew out of it. That's like people in their 30s, people in their 20s, people like that are teenagers. There was such a wide range of people supporting Thursday that it's more than just one kind of group of fans.
And I mean, we can talk about live shows as much as we want, but the main thing that people go to shows for is the music. And honestly, if your band doesn't sound good, you're not going to have that. And thrash metal is the perfect type of genre if you're looking for that. It's fast paced. It's so upbeat, and you have just these shredding guitarists. I mean, Kirk Hammett's probably one of the greatest guitarists of all time. He's able to shred anything you send his way. So that's tremendous. And then you have the hard drumming to go keep up the beat. And then their vocalists. They have such a range within vocalists between the screamers and the just flat out great singers. So that's a tremendous thing that you have to look out for.
To kind of rebuttal that in a sense, yes, the sound is super cool, but the sound isn't easily accessible to a person that's not already into rock. So if you're not already deep into rock, these average kind of fans that like, pop, country, rap, they're not going to go from that just immediately to thrash. It's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. And I think also that's why there hasn't been a lot of new successful thrash artists. A lot of the thrash artists have proven their test of time, and that's awesome. They've been around forever. But I haven't think of an artist that in the last 10 years that has come out that has reached that level of success that Metallica has, that like Testament has, all that sort of stuff. Post-hardcore, however, I believe, they haven't even reached their peak yet. You have bands early 2000s, AFI, Silver and Cold peaked at number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100. And This Murder, that song, peaked at number 1 on the Hot 100. And that was all the way back in early 2000s. Then you fast forward, Misadventures in 2016 peaked at number, it got an 86% on Metacritic. It got an 86% on Metacritic. Collide with the Sky in 2012 from Pierce the Veil peaked at number 21. You have bands like Silverstein. Their album was released last month, A Beautiful Place to Drown, peaked at number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100. These are artists that are new and old, and their sound is so accessible and enjoyable that it's still at the top of its game.
Now, I have to disagree with both of you for different reasons. Ronnie has said that it's such an accessible sound, but that's only if you enjoy like those heavier sounds. And a lot of the time nowadays, people don't enjoy that. And DJ Valentino said that that's why you need post-hardcore as like that like entrance, that gateway, which I get it. It is a gateway, but then like a lot of the times people hear that gateway and then they'll find different genres to actively like and enjoy. And I think what progressive metal has to offer in that sound area is that because we're always like experimenting and just fusing different types, like it's never just progressive rock and heavy metal. Dream Theater puts together different genres all the time, like old school heavy metal, glam, speed, hard rock, and you hear it with their sounds, their albums, but also like none of them really do sound the same. Mastodon, Between the Buried and Me, Symphony X, Periphery, Animals as Leaders, they're all different sounds, and you can find like your cup of tea, really.
I agree with that. I think that progressive metal has a wide variety and you can find your sound, but I don't think that people ever grow out of post-hardcore. Yes, it might be the gateway into these other bands, but I think it's such a strong staple enough that it never completely goes away. Again, you look at like Pierce the Veil. Pierce the Veil's very, like the last show that they did in recent times was at KFMA Fall Ball 2017, and they had a 12,000 person capacity at that venue. And they played it, and it was phenomenal. So it just kind of shows that, yes, it can get them into other subgenres of metal, but it's always going to be there. It's never going to go away. Post-hardcore, that is.
Speaking on accessibility and kind of like that gateway, I think power metal, honestly, is probably one of the more popular forms of metal, especially overseas. Like in Europe, people really love power metal, and a lot of power metal bands come from Europe just because it's so popular over there. Not only that, but like some of these bands in like the power metal genre have been around like almost as long as some of like, you know, the core thrash bands. Like Manowar's been around since I think like 1980. Blind Guardian's been around since I think 87 or 86. But, you know, these bands have longevity, and I think, you know, that's something that can't be ignored, is the fact that these bands have popularity, not just within the US, which tends to be where a lot of metal finds its home, but overseas as well. And then, you know, they also have longevity.
I do agree that power metal is definitely super popular in Europe, more so. But I will say that Europeans, it's tough to kind of combat genres when talking about Europe, because Europeans who enjoy rock don't care about like subgenres. Like it's very infamous that in Europe they go, if it's got guitar music, we like it. You know what I mean? Like they like it's kind of a more Americanized thing to go like, well, doom metal versus progressive metal versus power metal. You know what I mean? So I think that's probably why power metal is so successful overseas, is because people don't care. They just want to hear guitars and good stuff. And if you want to hear just like guitars and some decent music, power metal's great. It's just like in terms of lyrical substance, it's tough. I keep going back to that lyrical thing, and feel free to combat this. But most of the power metal bands that I encounter, their biggest pitfalls is that the lyrics can kind of sound formulaic. Like, we've got to rise up against this army, this invisible army, and we're the ones, and we're gonna beat this, you know, this invisible force, and that gets old after a while.
Well, I will agree certain bands do have some problems with lyrics. I also think it's not just as simple as it's this grandiose idea of like, oh, good versus evil. I think that's like the base level of a lot of power metal. But if you look deeper into albums, and Sabaton's latest album was so good because it really dove into lyrics, and they have a whole song that's literally like a war hymn because of, it was focused on World War One. It was the Great War. That's the album I was talking about. And they have like they have letters from soldiers that died in battle, and I don't think that's like poor lyricism. I think it's really diving in and embracing the topic that you're making a whole album about.
I think something else that has to get brought up is the legendary aspect. And, I understand that most of your guys are, for example, post-hardcore, like you said, Val, those are like the up-and-coming bands, more tenured towards the younger generation. So they really haven't had a chance to really cement their legendariness and their legacies. But for progressive power and thrash, I mean, like you mentioned earlier, Dio was probably one of the greatest frontmen in metal history, not just power metal, but in all of metal history. I mean, thrash metal has some of the greatest guitarists ever. We're talking about Dave Mustaine, James Hetfield, Kerry King, Gary Holt. Yeah, I'm looking down at my phone trying to remember these names. Jeff Hanneman, Kirk Hammett, all those guys, they left their legacies with these bands, and they did it, killerly. Everyone knows those bands. They're all practically household names because of how good their music was and how well they were able to work their fingers going down and out their guitar neck.
And yes, I do see where you're coming from, but one last thing to cement post-hardcore. Post-hardcore is not only easily accessible to everyone outside of rock, but there's a reason why it's so successful inside rock. Post-hardcore has the metal aspects that get the thrash metal fans involved, get the power metal and progressive metal fans involved. But it's also got the clean vocals, so that takes fans of more like dad rock, pop punk especially. The pop punk community loves post-hardcore. You have the emo community that loves it. Even in the subgenre of rock and roll itself, it's so diverse enough that it can maintain such a unanimity among everybody that it has something for everybody. And not every genre can say that. And another thing, lyrically speaking, these post-hardcore bands, their lyrics, that's what they're known for. They're known for these emotional, introspective lyrics. And that's something that the thrash metal community can really vibe with. The pop punk community, the emo community, the metalcore community, the deathcore community, everybody can find something in that post-hardcore subgenre.
In total, I definitely see where all of you are coming from, and I think all metal genres, it definitely matters on the type of person you are. I truly do believe the sound that progressive metal puts out, and if we're talking about lyrical composition, Mastodon's Leviathan is completely based off Moby Dick, and Opeth has many different songs that the lyrics really touch the souls of a lot of people. I think that's the reason progressive metal, it's long and it's aggressive and it's melodic and it's just all these different types of feelings put together, and it can reach anybody.
Well, to conclude, power metal, it's got some great qualities about it. Number one, it's got essentially worldwide appeal although it does have lighter guitar tones. I think, uplifting is something that is often looked down upon within the heavy metal genre, but it shouldn't be. It's got really great album concepts, and not only that, their live shows are spectacular to see. So, yeah, power metal.
In conclusion, thrash metal is arguably one of the greatest metal genres ever because it paved the way for so many bands, not to mention their sound. It's so upbeat and it's so energizing. I mean, have you guys ever worked out to Seek and Destroy's riff? I highly recommend that to all of you if you haven't already. But you have some great albums from Megadeth's Peace Cells, Ride the Lightning by Metallica, Cowboys, Pantera, and everything from Slayer. All those guys, they paved the way for at least one of those bands, and they left their mark on not just metal history, but music history as a whole.
In conclusion, post-hardcore has been around for such a long time, and it's maintained to be relevant in the mainstream community as well as in the rock community. Again, as I cited before, bands like Thursday, AFI, in that conception phase of post-hardcore, all the way fast forward to now, we've got bands like Sleeping with Sirens, where their album Feel peaked at number 3 on Billboard and stayed on for 12 weeks. And they've done that through their use of consistently being relevant with social media, whether that be first MySpace, then Tumblr, now TikTok, and through the lyrical content being always super in-depth and having the music have such a nature to it that it can get all the subgenres of rock behind it, as well as subgenres of other genres as well, like pop and rap, and people that enjoy that as much as they enjoy the rock scene. And I think that's why post-hardcore is my personal favorite genre of metal. But again, no disrespect to all the other genres of metal.
I think that's the main thing here. Regardless of what music you like, as long as we're all metalheads, we're all one big family.
That's true. As long as we can hear guitars in it, we're all happy at the end of the day.
So this has been WSOU's take on the best metal genre. Tune in again and comment down below what you think is the best.